Now and again, we'll experience a monumental event in our lives that can never be erased with time. If your memory's like mine, then with time, memories seem to soften. Those bitter or depressive moments seem less bitter and less depressive after a few years. For instance, as a child, I still remember fearing one of my uncles, whose raised voice would make me shake all over, and yet, with time, it seems now like it wasn't anywhere near as bad as my physical memory serves me. Then, one day, all that changed with a trigger. Something that opened up a Pandora's box of memories that brought together every emotion I'd known, from fear to sadness, from pride to shame, from tears to joy. That one single trigger had been laying quietly in the shadows of time to pounce on me when I least expected it. Hello, I'm George and welcome to another story, a collection of stories gathered and documented by people and for people like you and me. On Saturday, March the 18th, 2006, just 48 hours before Cyclone Larry would devastate the small township of Innisfail up in far north Queensland, I found myself with my little ones in the local shopping centre, following the state's directive like good citizens and preparing our emergency supplies. For those of us in Australia who live in the north, this tends to be an annual event that we've all come to know all too well. So on that day, my kids were running up and down the aisles of our local shopping centre, helping me gather the necessary and essential goods we'd need in the event Cyclone Larry turned south for Townsville. Kids are funny. Well, my kids are funny. And typically they'll bleed any situation for their benefit, even if they don't know they're actively doing so. Look, who are we kidding? Of course they know that they're doing it. They bleed us for their benefit, and so on this particular day, for every item classed as necessary and essential, there were 10 items that I had to turn away that the kids tried to plonk into the shopping trolley. But Dad, we might need these chocolate frogs if we run out of food, my eldest daughter protested as I lifted the packet of Freddo frogs out of the trolley and put it back on the shelf. Dad, come on, why do we need so much bottled water? It's raining outside. Let's get 7-Up instead. And you can have ginger beer, Dad, that's fair, my middle daughter Zoe said, doing her best to do a deal with her old man. The offer was tempting, but as I put the 6-pack of ginger beer back, I do recall wondering to myself if I was ever this manipulative towards my folks. I probably was, because clearly my kids had learnt this behaviour from me. Back home some hours later, and the last of the clean-up, or cyclone prep as we call it, was completed. The kids all played in the street that rainy afternoon as if nothing was wrong. I was standing in the doorway of my garage watching them and sipping my ginger beer. Yeah, like I said, the offer was tempting and that ginger beer made its way back into the trolley. Anyway, as I was saying, I was standing in the doorway of my garage watching them and sipping my ginger beer as I watched the neighbourhood kids join mine as the excited group began to talk about the coming weather. My son's tiny 6-year-old hand held mine as he said, Dad, I can't wait until the cyclone comes to Townsville. Can you? I looked at my boy and shook my head. Daddy doesn't want to see another cyclone, son. Not tomorrow, not ever. One cyclone is enough. You see, I too was 6 years old when Cyclone Tracy came to Darwin in 1974. And just like my son, I had no idea of the terrible destruction that would unfold. How could I? At 6 years old, the image of wild winds lashing trees with lots of paper and rubbish being blown around seemed like a great deal of fun. I could almost see myself standing outdoors in the midst of this wild cyclone with my arms outstretched and feeling so alive as the cool supercharged stormy winds passed around my tiny body, sending chills up and down my spine. At 6 years old, no fear entered my mind. After all, I was safe. I felt safe. I was with my mum and dad. And yet nothing can erase the memory of my father crying that Christmas morning as we climbed out of the ruins of our old Darwin house in the suburb of Jingly. After a long night that found our entire family huddled under mum and dad's bed for shelter, everything I ever knew about my dad changed. When the roof ripped off our house at 1 a.m, mum and dad shoved me and my brother under the double bed to escape the cyclonic winds that peppered missiles into our house through the night sky. Missiles like torn corrugated iron roofing, like tree branches and bits of metal fencing that embedded into the wall of my brother's bedroom, and Mrs. Howard's garden shed that was torn off its slab and then smashed into our kitchen. The look on Dad's face as he lay helpless next to his family under the double bed, knowing there was simply nothing he could do to protect any of us, is a look that changed everything for me. We finally stepped out of the ruined remains of our house to see our world destroyed completely at 6 a.m. in the pouring rain. Everything was smashed, our home was gone, and it seemed other families' personal possessions were emptied around our yard. I recall seeing Dad sitting on a small overturned boat that landed in our back garden as he looked around, trying to come to grips with the devastation the dim morning light was revealing to all of us. My dad is a brave and strong man with the biggest muscles I'd ever seen, and yet here he was sitting on an old boat reduced to tears. He looked so helpless and clearly didn't know where to go from here. I sat next to him, both of us soaked from the light rain that was now falling. "Why are you crying, Dad?" I remember asking him, only to see him shake his head slowly as if to say, "Not now, son, not now." A cyclone's impact is not just felt in a town, but in the heart of all those who've lived it. Speaking from personal experience, I can tell you it's the emotions that seem to last longer than any images in my mind of actual devastation. I was only 6 years old, and losing a house and all its possessions didn't mean so much to me because it's not like I had worked hard to pay for it all. But seeing my father wiped out as Darwin was wiped out left a lasting impression on me, and I believe he knew it. He read it in the way that I looked at him. "32 years later, in 2006, I watched the coverage on TV of Innisfail and the little towns surrounding it that were devastated by Cyclone Larry. Thankfully, we didn't get that cyclone in Townsville after all. Watching the news with my kids that afternoon brought back so many memories of 1974. I smiled at the images of families helping each other in the midst of this disaster, and I cried as I saw the tired, empty faces of people whose shattered lives had nowhere to go from here. "Why are you crying, Dad?" my 6-year-old asked, as he again put his tiny little hand in mine. I looked at him, and I had nothing to say. I simply shook my head, as if to say, "Not now, son, not now." Thank you for listening to another story. We hope that you've enjoyed it. Today's show was written by me, and music as always by my musically gifted son, Michael, who's not a 6-year-old boy anymore. He's now 16. In our next episode, we'll look at our first love. Do you ever find yourself wondering whatever happened to that girl or boy that you first had a crush on when you were a kid? It's true that with the help of social media today, it's possible to look them up. But do you ever wonder why? What is it about that first crush that keeps that dim flame burning within us? I was 5 years old when I first met the woman of my dreams. She was 13. She was tall, thin, she had beautiful curly hair and eyes that could melt any heart. You'd think that at 5 years old I'd be too shy to approach her, right? No, you're completely wrong. I let her know exactly how I felt. But that is another story. I'll talk to you soon.